All right, you are about to learn a very easy, super delicious recipe. In fact, there's a couple of recipes in this one recipe. It is the no-bake probiotic cheesecake. All right, welcome to another edition of easy upgrades. In fact, where I'm going to show you what we're going to feature is a friendly ferment. That's what I started saying, friendly ferment. This is my term for fermented foods with those good probiotics. We all need and want more probiotics into our diet, and one of the best strategies is going for a diversity of fermented foods. So if you're into sauerkraut, what else can you explore? If you're into kombucha, what else could you bring into your diet? Because every fermented food has its own unique spectrum of bacteria that we want to bring into our life, not only for the benefit of having a pre-digested food, be it milk, bread, sodas, whatever it is, tempeh, pre-digest the beans. These ferments make it more easy to digest the foods that we consume. Plus, if it's a live culture food, those probiotics are still living, and then they have a chance to become part of our microbiome. We've been learning all kinds of wonderful benefits that these little microorganisms have for our digestive health, immune health, but also mental and emotional health. And since the industrialization of our food system, there has been a shift away from fermented foods for various reasons, but now there's been a revival. We've gone a little bit too far. I think that's what we do as humans. We go too far one way, and then we start to come back like, oh yeah, that is a good idea. So here we are. This is another recipe you can add to your repertoire for probiotics, friendly ferments, and I'm going to show you how to create a no-bake probiotic cheesecake. So the first thing we're going to do is how to create the cheese. Then we'll talk about how to create, I did a version of a Saskatoon berry jam. We'll talk about that. And then ultimately how to put it all together in lots of different variations, forms, and versions. So if anytime you got questions, you got comments, put them down below. If you're loving what you're watching, give us a thumbs up. Every week we're doing these live videos showing you how to create what I call easy upgrades. So these simple little things you can add in, and today is absolutely that. It's a simple add-in that's going to upgrade your health without any major changes, because I know it's hard, to bring in new patterns, create new habits. That's a challenge, especially when you're looking at trying to break old ones. But what's easy is just adding in, just upgrading what you're doing already. So you might be a fan of cheesecake, you love cheesecake, you love this idea of how quick and simple it is. So the first step is we're gonna have to create the cheese, which is super easy, but will take 12 hours, meaning we're going to ferment it, culture it overnight. That's where we're going to create that culture of probiotics, let them proliferate and grow. And we do a straining method, and then it is ready to easily whip up in any moment into a cheesecake. But also talk about this cheese here that you're going to make can be used in savory situations as well. It doesn't have to be turned into cheesecake. So that's why it's kind of multiple recipes in one. Once you've created the base of this cheese, then you can use it any number of ways. And it wasn't until I've been doing this for a couple years, and I was like, wait a minute, this cheese could be awesome in cheesecakes. We started doing baked cheesecakes, and that could be a future recipe. And it was only recently I was like, hey, wait a minute here, stirred in some jam, and it was just instant deliciousness. So it can be a perfect breakfast, it can be a perfect snack, dessert. You can serve it to your guest, they're gonna love it and think you put a lot of time and energy into it. And the fact is, no, this is a real easy, simple one. So let's get going. Again, if you ever got any questions, comments, just post them down below, and we're ready to get started. So the first thing, I'll just say straight up front, this is a cheesecake that has the base of dairy. It's possible to be able to do it non-dairy. You could do a cashew cheese, something like that, but this one here is the base of dairy. So you want to find the best type of dairy that can work for you. And here's one of those things. A lot of people have sensitivities, maybe allergies to dairy. That is very oftentimes in its kind of unfermented form. I mean, I grew up drinking, 2% milk. I was the kind kind of kid that would just drink it or straight out the jug, and not the best. Doesn't work for everyone. We need the enzymes in the milk to help break it down, the lactase, which helps break down the lactose, and or we need the probiotics either from raw milk if they're inherently in there, or through a fermentation, which helps break it down. It's hard for us to just break down straight, pasteurized, homogenized milk. So that's been one of the challenges. And for me, milk works if it's raw or if it's fermented. And just choose the best source that you can. If you got your illegal back alleyway pickup of raw milk, awesome, go for it. If not, choose the best that you can in your area. So here in Calgary, in Alberta, I find Vital Greens is one brand that's pretty good. It's local, it's organic, and it's even though it's pasteurized, very minimal amount, just to kind of make those requirements, legal requirements, and then it's non-homogenized. There's all kinds of implications of what homogenizing does to our milk. So that's something, if we can, we want to avoid that. It will work with homogenized milk. That's just kind of my preference, to use the non-homogenized. And someone had asked about lactose-free milk. I've never worked with it, but my guess is that it would ferment with the action of these probiotics just the same, and you could do the same results. So, all right, here we go. Let's get started. I already had a batch done and finished, because the first step is simply to take some milk. So I did this last night, poured it into a pot, and you want to use something that is ceramic or glass. Main thing when we're doing fermentation, we don't want exposure to the metal where it could react, and so ceramic or glass is best. Or you can still warm the milk and then transfer it to a glass or ceramic bowl. That's totally up to you. So the main thing here is we want our milk at 86 degrees Fahrenheit, so warmer than room temperature, but really you're just very low on the stove, just warm to touch, right? So you put your finger in, you can feel it, and this is creating that right nice warm environment for the bacteria to grow and transform this milk into a cheese. So did that last night, poured my milk, warmed it up. Once I had it to about 86 degrees, again, just warm enough to touch, or you can use a thermometer, up to you. It's very forgiving. If you get it too hot, just let it cool down again. Even if it was at room temperature, you could still add the bacteria, but it's when we want to leave it overnight that we need a nice warm temperature. I'll tell you, one of the reasons why this recipe may not work for some people. I teach this in my fermentation class, and I give people cultures to take home and to try, and every once in a while it doesn't work. And very often I'll ask people, I say, okay, so you warmed up your milk, you added your culture, and now what did you do? Did you just leave it out on the counter overnight? And if the answer is yes, especially in the winter, the temperature may not have been warm enough. So once we've warmed up the milk, once we've added our culture, we need to incubate it at a warm temperature overnight. Not as hot as yogurt. Yogurt is over 100 degrees. Here it's kind of keeping it in that mid 80s. So most people in their homes, maybe it's high 60s, mid 70s degrees Fahrenheit is the average kind of room temperature. That's not quite warm enough. We just need it a little bit warmer. But I'll come back to that in a sec. First, we want to address what type of bacteria is going in there, where do you get it, what's going to make it happen. So this is a very specific culture to make cheese, and there are a couple of places you can get it. So at the Light Cellar, we sell this one. It's called Real Cheese. You make it home. So it is a mesophilic culture. It's from Cultures for Health. We have this at the shop. It gives you 8 little starter packets. So when you've got your milk warmed up, you would just grab one of these little starter packets, and you slice it open and you pour that in, and that will do, you could do half a pack in 2 liters, you could do 4 liters. The fact is, a little bit goes a long way. So 4 liters, I might pour in the whole packet. That is my starter. So that's me adding the bacteria to the milk to then go ahead and culture and pre-digest that, turn it into cheese. So that's our first step. Once we've added the milk, warmed it, added the culture, we put it somewhere warm for 12 hours. Now that is where the fermentation happens. And Brent's gonna come right in here with the camera, and you'll be able to see that overnight transformation has happened. So here we go. This is no longer milk. it is fermented. It's almost like a thick yogurt, right? So I could take a knife through that, or I could stick this in here, and you'd be able to see, you can almost kind of cut a little bit. So there's a bit of skim on top, but it has a thickness to it, and that is the result of the fermentation, of culturing. Again, kind of like just very similar to yogurt. That is the first step, the first stage. So you all with me here? We warmed up our milk, 86 degrees, thereabouts. We add in our culture. We stir it just to kind of let that mix all the way through. Place it somewhere warm. And you might be asking, okay, where's warm that's between 80 to 90 degrees? If you have a stove with a pilot light, maybe a little gas oven with a pilot light, stick it nice close to there. I use a dehydrator. I don't stick it in the dehydrator, but I stick it on top with that just on low. That's just the right nice warm temperature. Maybe it's in your furnace room where you have the hot water heater. That might just be that perfect amount. I'll stick a lid on top so nothing's gonna fall in there, and that just kind of keeps it sealed up. We don't want to like seal secure, but just cover and place it somewhere warm. You could have a hot water bottle, towels, that kind of thing, just to kind of keep it extra warm if you're really struggling for, okay, where's this 80 to 90 degrees going to happen? So try out a few variations. The temperature is really important. 12 hours overnight, then you are going to have your milk in this type of consistency. Now, the first thing you want to do, in fact, is take out a jar of this cheese just in this state that now will become your starter for the next batch. So though you've bought this just to get everything going, now this becomes your starter for the next batch. And so you can see that's what I have here, and this has been sitting in my fridge probably 6 to 8 weeks. It was from a previous different batch that I can use any time to now add to fresh milk and start it over again. This is a technical term. They call it backslopping in fermentation. So what that means is you just take some from your previous batch, throw it into the next batch of fresh milk, and that culture can grow. It can begin again. This is done in yogurt making. This is done in sourdough. Taking some from a previous batch, adding it to new, and that is one of the best, easiest ways to start a culture. So hey, maybe you got some friends, you guys all want to try this. You buy one little packet that gives you 8 starters, and you make the first batch, and boom, you're ready to go. So you can now share that with friends. You can just keep that in the fridge until you're ready to make the next batch. All right, so our next step here is we take the milk and we're gonna strain it. So this is the whole idea of separating the curds and whey. So maybe you got cheesecloth, or at the light seller, we sell these very handy dandy nut and seed milk bags. It's an organic cloth. Oh, I'm not doing so well trying to get that in with one hand. So I'm gonna go just grab my aim is not good this morning. So here we are. We'll just scoop that out so it doesn't spill all over the place. And into the cloth bag it goes, and then this is now gonna strain and separate out the whey. So that's the liquid portion that we don't want specifically for the cheese, right? So this is kind of like yogurt in this consistency, but when we strain it out, we're gonna get something a little bit more solid, of which you can see here. So here's the end result where it's all strained out. Now that is our nice soft cheese that becomes the base of our cheesecake. All right, so we'll get all that in there, let that drain, and you can actually save the whey. I've got some in my fridge back here. I'll just show you real quick. I save it, use it for all kinds of things. You can see here almost clear that is. It's very liquid. And that is actually full of probiotics. So this, you can add it to your smoothies. You can put it in the dog dish. You can soak your nuts, your seeds, your grains. And anytime that you're doing that process, which is very beneficial, take away some of those anti-nutrients, the enzyme inhibitors, the phytic acid, pre-soaking your nuts, seeds, and grains is a great way to do that. This whey is something that you can now use. You can also use this as a starter culture. So if you've seen my video on how to create the sourdough teff flatbreads, very oftentimes I'll start the teff culture temperature. So I got my teff flour, and I'll pour in a little bit of whey, and then that starts the culture. That starts my teff sourdough, adding in those good bacteria. I've seen a number of recipes and folks using whey as a starter for their sauerkraut as well, for your pickles. So you can save that aside. Comes very much in handy, and you'll get quite a lot. It's a maybe possibly a little bit more than 50%. So if you're going to do a 4-liter batch of this or a 2-liter batch of that, just know you're going to get at least 50% of that remaining liquid as whey, and then what strains out is then your cheese. So at this stage, once it's strained, which will take about 24 hours just to fully drain, just naturally, you can see that's already beginning to happen. We've got a good amount of liquid in there, so there's a certain amount that'll just flow through quite easily. Then at some point I might put a weight on it, maybe it's a plate, and then a little bit more weight, a little bit more pressure to then squeeze out the rest of that liquid. So that becomes up to you, how kind of firm or moist you want the cheese, because it's all about that moisture content. So you can see this one here, very little moisture content. So once that's strained, again, about that 24-hour timeline, then I'll remove that out the bag, put it in a container, and typically at this stage I'll add a little bit of salt, right? So again, this cheese can be used in a savory context and a sweet context. Typically for both, and especially for storage, I'll add a little bit of salt to the final cheese that's been strained out. So I'll take it out the bag, put it in a container, and add some salt, and then that just helps bring up the flavor, but also helps preserve it that much longer. Okay, so there it is. That's how you do the cheese, and we'll just quickly talk about turning this into a cheesecake. So again, this is amazing. Like this, again, this is a soft cheese, spreadable cheese, cheese dip, however you want to do it. Again, if you want to go savory, you can add herbs and spices to this. I've been working through this batch. This was originally kind of twice the size, and that's what I'll do. I'll just have a container of this in the fridge, kind of scoop out whatever I need and want in whatever context, and then put the lid back on, back in the fridge it goes. This will last for several weeks, no problem, in your fridge. And yeah, you don't have to flavor it all. So if you have plain there in the fridge, your context of what you're using it, you can flavor as needed, sweet or savory. Use it in all kinds of recipes. So that stays in the fridge. To make our no-bake cheesecake, I like to do little mason jars, where you can just go straight into a bowl, whatever your preference is. And we've got, you know, the wide mouth mason jar, the small 250 ml mason jar. And this is kind of fun. If you're doing guests, everyone can have their own little, you know, jar of cheesecake, whatever size you want to make. And so you can either pre-sweeten it if you want it just a touch sweeter. I'll often mix the cheese for the cheesecake with a little bit of honey or a little bit of maple syrup, your choice. One of my favorites, in fact, is adding birch syrup. Birch syrup, very similar to maple syrup, but it has a much darker, richer, almost like caramel, molasses-like flavor. Really, really fantastic. It's quite dear, I'll tell you that. I know people complain about the price of gas, but man, I complain about the price of birch syrup. It's about $100 a liter. You can get smaller jars and just kind of sprinkle some on top. What I'll do is I'll take my jar of maple syrup and I'll mix it. So I'll work my maple syrup down, then I'll top it back up with birch. So then it adds a nice combo. Very, very rich in minerals and absolutely fantastic. Goes really, really well in this kind of cheesecake dessert. Almost like a creme brulee type of you know, caramel like quality to it. So if you want to just elevate the sweetness of the cheese, absolutely at this stage, you know, stir in honey, stir in maple syrup, whatever it is initially, and then you're just going to add that to your jar. And there's so many variations to this. I know you guys are probably already thinking of different ways you'd like to create it, versions you can make. This is just plain. So this is unsweetened cheese, which tastes just good to me. But again, if you want that little bit of sweetness, add some sweetener, honey, maple syrup, birch syrup. Go ahead and add in some vanilla, you know, stir that up, create that base. And then next, very simply, you take a jam, And you can add, so this is my Saskatoon berry jam. I'll talk about my process for creating that. You add that on top to nice, beautifully plate this. You can either have just the jam on top, or you can go ahead and kind of stir and swirl that in, and then that creates a really nice presentation as well. If you want that little bit of crust, you can either add it to the bottom of the jar, or I've had cheesecakes too where it's on top and then you just kind of mix it in. So that could be homemade granola or store-bought granola. That could simply be sprouted or toasted nuts and seeds. That works as well. So just put that either bottom or top. Same with the jam. It can be bottom or top to your cheese that's either plain or unsweetened. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about the jam. I did also do a recipe back in July, or maybe it was a little bit later, August, September, sometime last year, of the Saskatoon jam, the one that I'm using here. I made this July 21st. It was probably a little bit later that we did the video. Anyways, that's up on YouTube. We'll post that down in the comments so you can check that out. It's a very unique way that I had come up with creating my own jam. It's a recipe that will get you a jam and a syrup at the same time. So whether it's Saskatoon's, raspberries, I mean, we're just about to hit that summer berry season. So make sure you check that recipe out and get the inspiration of how you create it. Very simply is, I would throw any type of fruit or berry into a pot. Saskatoon's the ones I was working with because they're so abundant out where we live. And you add water, fill that up with water, and then let that simmer, boil it down. And as that simmers, the water's going to be pulling a lot of that flavor out. If you go 12 hours, a friend of mine, Denis, he brewed up his Saskatoons in that way. He did it overnight. They pulled all the flavor out. So literally what was left was just the fiber. There was hardly any color left in those Saskatoons. So all the flavor would be in the liquid. But if you do it my method and you just do it for half hour to an hour, you're going to get a lot of flavor in the liquid, and you're still going to have a ton of flavor left in the berries. And you strain that off, and what's going to happen is that liquid that you're straining, that becomes your syrup, and then the fiber-rich pulp full of all that pectin, which still has lots of flavor, that becomes your jam. So it's kind of like a two-in-one recipe where you can get a syrup and a jam, and then you just sweeten them both. So the leftover berries, I puree that up with a bit of honey, a bit of maple syrup to just kind of touch up the sweetness if you like. And then that liquid, you simmer that down with additional sugar from a honey, maple syrup, cane sugar, whatever your preference is. But I walk you through that whole step-by-step in my video. And I made multiple jars of jam and syrup and stored them in the freezer. So here I am many months later, and I'm still pulling out from my stock. And that was the inspiration behind this. So Saskatoon berry jam in my cheesecake. Here we go. Let's give it a taste. I know it's delicious, but you just want to see, right? Just for proof. Proof is in the pudding. Here we go. Absolutely incredible. So this is amazing. I would have no hesitation eating this as a breakfast. I would have no hesitation eating it as a snack, but also as a real treat at dessert, right? Like, imagine you have got guests coming over, you're serving them homemade cheesecake that you've actually made the cheese, which is so simple. You would think, wow, okay, cheese, that's a bit of a process. And some of the cheeses are, right? If you're doing blue cheese or feta or whatever it is, I mean, there's so many different types of cheeses out there. This, I would wager, is probably the easiest fermented cheese to make. So hopefully you've gotten some ideas, hopefully you've gotten some inspiration to bring this into your life. If you need the culture, we do have a few of these packets at the Light Cellar to get you started. And again, once you do, then save some aside, because now you can be perpetually creating your own cheese. You've got that culture, you've got it started, you've got it going, and you can do weeks between batches. It doesn't need to be continually. So make a batch, save some aside. It can be a few weeks later, you do another batch. Main key thing is bring it up to 86 degrees, Keep it at that temperature overnight while it cultures, while it ferments. It's unlike kefir milk. You can just sit it out the counter, room temperature, it'll still ferment. This one here needs that little bit of warmth. Not as warm as yogurt. Yogurt's over 100 degrees. Hence why there's a lot of yogurt makers and the incubators you can get. This one you can get pretty close by the methods I suggested, in the oven, in the dehydrator, in your furnace room, whatever you can, just to bring up the room temperature a little bit more. All right, so feel free again, post some comments down below. Hope you enjoyed this episode. We're gonna keep going week by week. We got more good, tasty, easy upgrades for you. Thanks for tuning in. Give us a like, share it out with your friends. This is all about fun and connection with your food, creating delicious things that you can enjoy, that you can share with others. Thanks again for watching. All right, and thanks again to our friends on Instagram